how can we think through these new forms of collecting and put them in line with what a museum does in forms of stewardship, telling stories, bringing untold stories to the forefront, and how do our contemporary, our spaces of NFT, our spaces of digital collectibles create knowledge from these collections, right? How can we bring and facilitate that better? That is what is interesting to me. My name is Rosa Menkman. I'm here at The Void, which is a new platform for audiovisual publishing in the realms of artistic research. And I was invited to talk about collecting. To me, that's interesting because the last interaction I had with the INC Money Lab was a publication, which is already from March 3rd, 2021. And it was my remarks on crypto art. Now, this is obviously old stuff, but what is of interest to me at least is I think this space has brought redefinitions to the foreground. A lot of words were either new or in the need to be redefined. So I'm thinking here about words like collecting, collections, documentation, or derivatives and authenticity. I think about systems of indexations, ownership, worth, but also value. And I think these get interchanged a lot. Maybe stewardship, scarcity, something I had to kind of reevaluate also for a talk that I gave during a conference, which was called BiblioTech. During BiblioTech, we were talking about different libraries and speculative collections. I wanted to go into this text that is called My Collectible As, written by Mackenzie Work. So she writes, to think about digital objects as collectible, it may help to start by asking what it is that is actually being collected. We tend to think that what is collected is a rare object. But what makes it rare? Perhaps there is more than one way to look at the rarity of an object, or the reasons why an object can be rare. To make a digital object rare, it can be locked in various ways. I'm going to skip a few paragraphs. The key is that the information about the artwork is actually the most important thing about the artwork. What establishes the value, and it's also debatable what is then the value, if it's monetary or cultural, for instance, of the work, is that people talk about it, write about it, that it circulates. Unauthorized pictures of it circulate. The more it circulates, the more value it has. So here it's obviously cultural value. The actual work is a derivative of the value of its simulations. The future of collecting may be less in owning the thing that nobody else has, and more in owning the thing that everybody has. Finally, there's one more sentence that I would like to highlight, and that is, what is collectible is not the artwork or even documentation. What is collectible is the simulation of the artwork in the art world and beyond. Collected, she writes, is nothing more than the act of collecting itself, which is a derivative of the information circulating about the work. This sentence, what is collected is nothing more than the act of collecting itself, is really interesting because we need to dive into what the act of collecting has become beyond and before the NFT space, and what kind of new questions this has brought to us in the space, and also what collections have become and what role they now play. During this digitization of everything cultural, there's already a huge past of collecting, and libraries are just a part of that. I'm thinking about my old personal collections that were on Soulseek or on Delicious. Now they've maybe moved to Bandcamp or Miro boards. But I'm also thinking about shadow libraries. If you're not familiar with shadow libraries, there's a beautiful collection on Monoscope of them. One of maybe a form of a shadow library is actually the Prelinger Library, which is an analog space, but it has a lot of its books also digitized and in the archives of the web archive. I just wanted to visit this library with you, showing my collection inside a collection, thinking through collections. So here we are. We're at the entrance of the Prelinger Library. It could be called a new form of a zettelkast. Zettelkast is just where you put all your kind of references, little texts on topics, sporadically connected. In this case, it is a real library, but the topics are less traditional. So this is Rick, Megan, and Jay sits here in the corner. I think the light didn't struck him well. They sit you down, they give you a drink, and this 2D map of kind of like a collection of favorite topics that the library covers. There's color, radio, and Black Lives Matter topic. Then they have also a collection, for instance, of political pins. So the things that you wear when you show that you have voted, or if you're like in favor of a particular political group. And they call them universes of a moment, a thought. And they are all in a little box. And so it's not just books or documents, it's all kinds of materialities. And here we're coming already very close to a sense of an expanded library. It's not just books, it's not just texts, it's objects. The material carrier of knowledge has been expanded, and libraries are now taking cue in that as they become a library of different materials of knowledge. I'm just pulling up the Prelinger Library's Wikipedia page, kind of describe who they are, what they do. It's like funded since 2004 in San Francisco. The library is unusual in that it uses a custom system of organization designed by Megan that intends to facilitate and emphasize browsing. So it's not using this Dewey Decimal System that most libraries usually use. They have their own way of kind of making connections, and this is also like someone else's memory palace maybe. And so browsing, that thing that we used to do on the internet, really becomes something that captures you and your imagination about what browsing through different material objects could be. This is also why they call it a library of serendipity. It has been set up to bring you these serendipitous moments. And I think that's the beauty of what these new libraries could do. Yeah, so here we are at the entrance. What I did in the short time that I had, I 3D scanned the whole library, because then I could take it home and I could revisit what was sitting next to each other. I just wanted to walk with you through the space. Oops, I went inside the bookcase. Here you see a collection of collections. It's a wall full of big binders that have the collection, for instance, of VHS tapes, maps of a certain space, etc. So for BiblioTech, I was invited to talk about what collecting means. And I had already previous talk with friends. One of them, for instance, is John Satrom from Chicago. We realized that we are actually collectors of the digital. And I think around the 2010s, right-click save wasn't like a joke yet. We had folders full of images. And in one end, it's like logical because back in the days, browsing was expensive, so you didn't want to have to go back to a certain image, you would download it. On the other end, like we had specific types of images we saved. These were glitch images. But then we started to talk more through this kind of like compulsive way of collecting digital objects. And we realized that a lot of our collections are not just in the digital, they are also in real life. Like we are actual collectors since day one of our existence. Okay, that's too much. But we are big collectors. We have collections inside collections. And we came to the conclusion that you can collect in multiple ways. But one way is to collect collections that are open-ended, that are not as much about encompassing the whole object, but it's about that it gives you imaginations to open up the object more. So every object that you add to that one collection just gives you kind of this imaginary route to think through the genre. For the BiblioTech conference, I thought it would be interesting to bring back this type of personal collecting and to think through what those types of collections could be. And maybe that gives us like a way to think through new forms of collecting. So what I'm gonna do is something that is a little bit more personal than normal. I'm gonna invite you in to my hoarder life. It's called My Old Collection of Collections. I wanted to give them all kind of a classification, so different classes of collections. First one I want to start with is my traditional collection of finite sets. So here we have stamps from the leaders of Spain, the UK, the Netherlands and France. Obviously they are formally responding to particular designer trademarks, and the only thing that really can change is maybe the color, the leader and the price they're worth, or maybe the quality at which I took them from letters. Anyway, everybody knows these types of collections. They're rather trite, but they have a lot of equivalents in the digital also. Then here we come to traditional collections of non-finite or permutating artifacts. This is boxes full of special rocks. One of the many other boxes that make up this collection is also my seashell museum, which has a name. It's called the Nautilus. Another permutating artifact. Here we have sugar bags saved for the museum of my childhood best friend. This collection never made it to his collection because his mother found out that he secretly would eat all the sugar bags at night in bed. Another category of collections would be naive collections. They consist of objects I just cannot seem to throw away. So here we have, for instance, a collection of bugs. I see some dragonflies, moths, etc. Casts of my teeth, seeds, my childhood stuffed animals, and dog socks. But this is not really my collection, it's the collection of the dog Kraker. Then I have some collections that function as abstractions or essences of a space. They consist of special objects or memory artifacts. This is a box that has all the artifacts from Australia. During my visit I collected corals, a ponytail of an actual pony, seashells and part of a clock. The USA is confined within a dried salamander, 4 butterfly wings, some very precious notes of my mother, including a list of the names of the friends she met during our visit, so she could remember them, and also a list of things that she enjoyed during our trip together and how to make it more enjoyable. It reads, be happy, share, and do things together. Then we have Russia, which is a floater, a spring, some old barbed wire. Mexico has a little bow tie, a fridge amulet, some stones, and a few old bottle caps. Japan has a leaf, some strings, 3 bugs, dried grass, something around 100 yen, saved inside this side view car mirror cover. Then the next iteration of collections are objects that are more than just an object. They have dried frogs that will never be kissed, and a collection of wishbones that still have a wish inside of them. So this is just a short collection of collections, and I think the sum of these objects just becomes more than the objects themselves. So it's impossible to collect or to take home what they represent, but they do become a conduit for imagination. They form what they call a cosmos. Making and collecting all these collections, they are pinning something down. I cannot take the Prelinger library home. I cannot take my full and entire experience of Australia home, but I can kind of try and encompass it into these relational objects together. So I'm constantly chasing and reformulating the ends and the limits of these collections. When I do research, I'm collecting all these digital objects, texts, videos, images, little footnotes, and I draw connections between them. And so I want to pull out a few examples to show that's what a research-based practice really is. It's collecting different open-ended perspectives on a particular subject. that is where, to me, these material objects becoming more than the sum of their parts. Here we are in the Prelinger library again. I just stuck in some of my collected subjects. Here we see a vernacular file formats, and this is the installation as it was in the Stedelijk Museum. I want to pull this up for a quick moment on the web. The vernacular file formats is a work from 2010. It was about the language of image encoding and video encoding and how that can be shown on the surface of the image through glitching the data file. The Stedelijk Museum bought the archive, a whole collection of different invocations of the work that became finally this one installation that the audience could see. But in the back end of the museum, there was all the research, the PDFs, and everything else. Another work that I think is of interest is a vernacular of glitch effect. I watched the last 30 years of sci-fi trailers in the Internet Movie Database. And every time a glitch was there, I took a screenshot and I described why this glitch was used within that particular setting. What was it signifying? Why did a Hollywood producer put a glitch within that particular trailer? So these types of languages I thought were very interesting, but I happened to see them by collecting images, by drawing out lines inside a collection of collections. My last collection that I wanted to pull up, my collection of impossible images. It's a collection that I created by talking to the scientists at CERN. It's a collection of different impossible images that I got from interviewing over 80 scientists there. So I have a lot of impossible images, and then I started to categorize them. What makes this image impossible? Within this particular work, which is called The Blob of Impossible Images, it's another digital space, I made kind of an indexation or categorization of impossibility. This is the blob. And within the blob, which is an impossible image by itself, right? Because it's a Marais-based world. Here we see an exhibition of different types of impossibility. And so some of these impossibilities are time-based. Others are just impossible because we don't believe they are possible. Their impossibility is stuck in our belief systems. Some of them are impossible because we don't have the technology to create them. I started to categorize them, and from that I created this new perspective of what are the affordances for making things possible and where does impossibility slip in. Through these different types of collecting different perspectives on a topic, what I started to see is if you first start casting a really wide net around the subject you want to understand, and then you use that net really as a network of different nodes and see the relations between them, the subject kind of becomes a vessel for making new knowledge. So you start to see how they relate, where you can draw lines, imaginary or real, and how you can tell a story and how that story might at the end become kind of like a knowledge about that subject. And at this point in time, for me to put these types of thoughts not in the Miro board or in Obsidian space, but to put them in a 3D environment like I've done right here, like I've done with the Prelinger library, they become their own memory cabinets or even cabinet of wonders. But then by me giving a guided tour through this wonder cabinet in 3D, I create this memory trail. We share more than just the digital objects. We share an interpretation and a lens on how they connect. To draw all of that back to where we started with Mackenzie Wark's My Collectible Ass, which I love. I wanted to come back to this one sentence. What is collected is nothing more than the act of collecting itself, which is a derivative of the information circulating about the work. What we should strive for now is to create spaces in which we can show there is more than the act of collecting. There's also the act of telling stories. And so here I want to draw back one line to an NFT conference. We organized it actually in Kassel. And Tina Rivers Ryan was there, and she made a proposal about NFT spaces. She said, I want to propose the museum as a blockchain. So what does that mean? Or how does she interpret that? And how does that line up with what I'm trying to talk through? The blockchain has brought new questions to the digital space, which could be more things than just these collections. Question is, if the museum could be like a blockchain, how can we think through these new forms of collecting and put them in line with what a museum does in forms of stewardship, bringing untold stories to the forefront? And how do our contemporary, our spaces of NFT, our spaces of digital collectibles facilitate this type of threading that museums have hundreds of years of best practice in? How can we draw from that space and make knowledge from these collections, right? How can we bring and facilitate that better? That is what is interesting to me. So I want to thank Tina and Mackenzie Wark for their thoughts and how I got to present them at BiblioTech and now here in INC. And I hope that we can think through that more consistently and more deeply.